Once upon a time, in a peaceful village nestled deep within the hills, the people lived simple and harmonious lives. The village was called Ekolu, a place where everyone knew each other and respected the traditions passed down through generations. The air was always filled with the sweet scent of blooming flowers, and the laughter of children echoed through the streets. In this village, there was one rule that everyone held sacred: the rule of innocence. The elders taught the children that purity was a treasure to be guarded, especially for the young girls. They were expected to remain innocent until the day they married, for their purity was the heart of the village's honor. Parents took great pride in their daughters, boasting about how pure and virtuous they were. It was a matter of pride for the village, something that was cherished above all else. But as the years went by, a change began to stir, one that no one had expected. The village had always been untouched by the outside world, but one day, a stranger arrived. Her name was Adis, and she was unlike anyone the villagers had ever seen. She walked into the village with confidence, wearing clothes that were bright, modern, and bold. The villagers whispered among themselves, wondering where she had come from, and why she didn't follow the same traditions they held so dear. Adis was not like the other women of Ekolu. She was from a distant city, where the rules were different. In her world, women had the freedom to express themselves in ways that were unimaginable to the villagers. Adis' presence in the village caused a stir, as the women of Ekolu began to admire her boldness and beauty. They watched her closely, captivated by her confidence and the attention she received from the men of the village. Soon, the young girls of Ekolu started to wonder, could they be like Adis? Could they wear bright clothes, speak freely, and be admired by the men without shame? They began to question the traditions they had grown up with, the rules that bound them to a life of innocence. They started to dress like Adis, to speak like her, and to act in ways that were once unthinkable. One girl, Ngozi, was the first to try. She had always been the perfect example of innocence in the village, but after seeing Adis, she wanted more. She wanted to feel the freedom Adis had. So, she began meeting with the village men, seeking their attention in exchange for gifts, just like Adis had done. At first, she kept it a secret, but soon, her friends noticed the changes in her. They saw the gifts she received, the new clothes, the confidence in her step. Curiosity spread like wildfire. The other girls in the village began to follow Ngozi's lead, secretly meeting with the men to gain their attention and gifts. It wasn't long before the entire village was caught in a web of secrecy, each girl vying for the same admiration that Adis had inspired. The elders, who had always prided themselves on keeping the village pure, soon began to notice the changes. They saw the girls wearing clothes that were too revealing, speaking out of turn, and acting in ways that contradicted everything they had taught. The village that once valued innocence was now in chaos, as the girls of Ekolu had traded their purity for the thrill of experience. The situation came to a head one fateful day, when the village was called together for a special ceremony. The elders had arranged for a sacred test, one that would prove which of the girls still held onto the innocence that had once defined the village. The test was simple: each girl would take part in a ritual to prove her purity. One by one, the girls stepped forward. Some of them tried to hide their guilt, while others walked with newfound confidence, their eyes filled with defiance. When it came time for Ngozi to step forward, she looked around at her friends, all of them wearing the same knowing smiles. The test was meaningless to them now. They had already crossed the line, and there was no going back. The ritual was a disaster. The girls failed, one after the other. The elders watched in shock as their beloved traditions crumbled before their eyes. The test was supposed to preserve innocence, but instead, it exposed the deep transformation that had taken place in the village. Adis had unknowingly led them down a path that could never be undone. As the ceremony ended, the village was left in turmoil. The parents, who had once boasted about their daughter's purity, were now faced with the painful truth. The innocence of the village had been lost, and the girls had become something they never expected. The elders, too, were left questioning the traditions they had upheld for so long. But even in the midst of the chaos, a new sense of freedom began to rise. The girls of Ekolu, once bound by strict rules, now had the chance to define their own futures. They were no longer just symbols of innocence, they had become women of experience, with the power to shape their own destinies. And so, the village of Ekolu was forever changed. The once peaceful and innocent community had transformed into a place where tradition and experience collided. The girls, who had once been bound by rules, now walked with their heads held high, embracing the new world they had created for themselves. The story of Ekolu is one of innocence lost and experience gained. It is a tale of change, of breaking free from the past, and of discovering the power of individuality in the face of tradition. The village may never be the same again, but the girls who once followed the old rules are now the leaders of a new generation, one that will forge its own path in the world. Once upon a time, in a small, peaceful village nestled in the hills, there was a community that lived by strict traditions. The villagers took pride in their innocence, purity, and respect for one another. The young girls, especially, were the pride of the village, protected and cherished, taught to stay pure, respect their elders, and uphold the values that had been passed down through generations. Life was simple, but the villagers were content. They lived in harmony with nature, and their traditions were the foundation of their society. But the winds of change were beginning to blow, and they would soon reshape the village in ways no one could have ever imagined. It all started with a girl named Kemi. She was curious, adventurous, and eager to explore the world beyond the village's boundaries. Kemi began to question why the girls in the village were so restricted, while the boys seemed to enjoy more freedom. She often heard stories from travelers who came through the village, stories of women in faraway cities who could wear what they wanted, speak their minds, and live independently. Kemi found these stories intriguing. She wondered if there was more to life than the rigid rules she had been raised with. Why should the boys have all the fun? She thought. Kemi's curiosity sparked a change within her. She began to talk to other girls in the village, sharing her thoughts and ideas. It didn't take long before others joined in. They, too, began to question the limitations placed on them. What was the point of following these rules? Why couldn't they experience life the way the outsiders did? Before long, Kemi had formed a group. They began meeting in secret, away from the prying eyes of the elders. They would talk about the new world they had glimpsed through the stories of the travelers, the world where women were free to make their own choices. They longed for the excitement of new experiences, of being seen as more than just daughters or wives. They craved attention, freedom, and the thrill of breaking away from the norms. But as they began to explore their newfound desires, they were drawn into something far more dangerous than they could have ever imagined. One day, an older man in the village, a charismatic stranger named Tond, approached Kemi. He had heard rumors of the secret meetings and saw an opportunity. He promised the girls a life filled with gifts, money, and admiration, but at a cost. He said, "You want to experience the world, don't you? I can help you get what you want. All you have to do is spend time with the men, be nice to them, and you'll get everything you've ever dreamed of." Kemi, driven by the desire for a taste of that new life, agreed. She convinced the other girls to follow her lead, assuring them that no harm would come of it. What started as a way to experience the outside world soon spiraled into something far darker. The girls, eager for the attention and material rewards, grew further detached from the values that had once defined them. They began meeting the men in secret, accepting their gifts and money. They enjoyed the attention they received, feeling special and powerful. The boys who once seemed so free now seemed dull in comparison to the excitement they felt. The more they met with the men, the more the girls began to forget their village's sacred traditions of respect, purity, and modesty. The elders, unaware of what was happening, continued to speak about the importance of staying pure and preserving the village's honor. They thought the girls were still listening, still holding on to the values they had been taught. But the truth was, the girls had already begun to drift away from those values. They were no longer the innocent girls they had once been, they were transforming, slowly but surely, into something else. As the days passed, more and more girls joined Kemi's secret meetings. What had started as a few curious girls turned into a large group. They became bolder, more defiant. They didn't feel shame or guilt anymore. They had convinced themselves that this was their right, that they deserved to experience life on their own terms. They kept their actions hidden from their families and the village elders, living a double life. On the outside, they appeared to be obedient, following the rules, but behind closed doors, they were breaking every tradition that had once been sacred. But as the village's young girls transformed, something began to change in the village itself. The once thriving crops began to wilt, and the animals that had always roamed freely started to fall ill. The villagers grew uneasy. They had always respected the gods, followed their traditions, and lived in harmony with nature. What could be causing this sudden decline? In desperation, the elders turned to the village oracle, Adibeo, a wise elder known for his connection to the spiritual world. Adibeo listened carefully to their concerns, sensing something ominous in the air. After a long silence, he spoke gravely. "The gods are displeased," he said. "The purity of the village has been broken. The traditions have been abandoned. To restore balance, a great sacrifice must be made." The villagers were shocked. They had always believed that their way of life, their traditions, would protect them from misfortune. Now, they were facing the reality that their actions unseen, but no less damaging, had angered the gods. "The sacrifice must be made within 2 days," Adibeo continued. "If not, the curse will grow stronger, and more suffering will fall upon the village." The villagers were terrified. They needed to find 2 virgin maidens to carry out the sacrifice, but the question hung heavy in the air: who among them could be pure enough to make this offering to the gods? The elders had always trusted that their girls were pure, that they would uphold the traditions. But now, they doubted everything. The next morning, the town crier rang his bell through the village, calling all the young girls to the palace. The elders prepared for the virginity test, which would determine who among the girls could serve as the sacrifice. But when the test was performed, the truth was revealed: no girl in the village was a virgin anymore. The villagers were stunned. The transformation of the girls, led by Kemi's rebellion, had far-reaching consequences. The purity that had once been the pride of the village was gone, replaced by secrecy and betrayal. The elders were filled with shame and regret. They had failed to see the signs, and now the village was facing the wrath of the gods. Adibeo, with a heavy heart, addressed the villagers. "The gods see everything," he said. "We have lost our way. The curse will not be lifted without the sacrifice. We must find a way to restore the purity of our village." The villagers now understood the gravity of the situation. Their once strong traditions had been broken, and the girls who had once represented the heart of their community had lost everything. The village was in turmoil, and the future seemed uncertain. The price of abandoning their innocence was higher than anyone could have imagined, and now, they had to face the consequences. In the heart of a lush and serene village, nestled away from the hustle of the outside world, there existed a peaceful and innocent way of life. The villagers, known for their strong traditions and close-knit community, lived simple yet fulfilling lives. Their world was one where purity, respect, and honor were the foundations upon which everything stood. It was a place where innocence thrived, and the elders watched over their youth with care, making sure they remained grounded in their customs. But change, as it always does, crept in slowly, unnoticed at first. The innocence that had been so deeply cherished began to slip away. It all began with the arrival of a newcomer. A girl from the city, Isimeh, came to KURU, bringing with her a different way of life. She was bright, beautiful, and full of charm, a striking contrast to the humble villagers who had always adhered to their strict codes of conduct. Her presence was magnetic, and soon, the village began to change. At first, Isimeh was seen as a breath of fresh air. Her stories of the city intrigued the villagers, particularly the younger generation. The girls of KURU, who had grown up learning the ways of the village, began to look at Isimeh with awe. She wore different clothes, spoke in a way they'd never heard before, and lived a life that seemed exciting and free. The attention she received from the men in the village only made her more admired. But this admiration would soon turn into something far more dangerous. The once innocent girls of KURU began to stray from their traditions. They started imitating Isimeh's way of life, abandoning the values they had been taught. What started as curiosity grew into a rebellion against the old ways. They no longer respected the sacred customs that had once kept the village in harmony. The elders watched in horror as their youth, who had once been the pride of the village, began to lose their innocence. It was not just the girls who were affected. The men, too, were drawn into the chaos. The pure-hearted young men who had once treated the women of the village with respect began to fall under Isimeh's spell. Their attention shifted, and soon, the village was filled with whispers, discontent, and confusion. The elders, unable to stop the tide of change, could only look on as their once peaceful village descended into turmoil. The innocence of the village, once cherished by all, had been lost. The sacred traditions that had bound the people together now seemed like old stories, irrelevant in the face of Isimeh's influence. The village, which had always been a symbol of peace, began to lose its sense of identity. The unity that had once made them strong was now shattered, and the elders knew they had to act before the village was lost forever. The gods, angered by the village's disobedience, sent a curse upon KURU. Crops withered, animals fell ill, and the once beautiful land began to die. The villagers knew that this was a sign, a warning that the gods were displeased. The elders gathered to discuss what could be done to restore balance. It became clear that someone had to take responsibility for the chaos that had unfolded. Isimeh, the girl from the city, was seen as the one who had led the village astray. The elders believed that her actions had caused the downfall of their once pure world. With no virgin maidens left and the village in crisis, the elders decided that Isimeh must face the consequences of her actions. Her influence had been too great, and now, the village demanded that she make amends. In a final act of atonement, Isimeh was chosen to carry the sacrifice to the gods. She would walk alone into the forest, offering a calabash filled with sacred items. It was her burden to bear, the weight of the village's sins on her shoulders. Isimeh knew that this journey would be her last chance for redemption. As she walked through the village, she felt the eyes of the villagers upon her, their anger and disappointment heavy in the air. They were no longer the people who had once admired her. She had become a symbol of everything that had gone wrong. The path to the altar was long and treacherous. For 2 days, Isimeh walked alone, carrying the heavy burden of the calabash. She reflected on everything that had happened, her rise to prominence, the attention she had craved, and the influence she had wielded. She realized how fragile and fleeting the admiration she had received truly was. The villagers, who had once seen her as a beacon of hope, now saw her as the cause of their suffering. When she finally reached the sacred altar in the heart of the forest, Isimeh knelt and prayed for forgiveness. She understood now that her actions had not just affected her but had harmed the entire village. She had led them away from their values, and now the consequences were clear. The curse had to be lifted, and only she could make that happen. Returning to the village, Isimeh was met with mixed emotions. The curse had been lifted, but the cost of redemption was steep. Isimeh was forced to live in isolation for the next 12 years, cut off from the village and its people. She was given the task of carrying sacrifices to the gods, a constant reminder of the price she had paid for her mistakes. The villagers, though relieved, still carried resentment in their hearts, and Isimeh lived alone, reflecting on the damage she had caused. The village of KURU would never be the same. Isimeh's transformation, from a symbol of innocence to one of experience and regret, was complete. Her story became a lesson for the children of KURU, a reminder of the dangers of straying from tradition and the importance of respecting one's heritage. The village, though healing, would never forget the lessons learned from the fall of innocence to the harsh reality of experience. And so, the village of KURU carried on, but with a newfound understanding of the delicate balance between tradition and change. The story of Isimeh, the girl who brought both chaos and redemption, would echo through the generations as a cautionary tale about the cost of losing one's innocence. If you enjoyed this story, please like the video, comment what you learned from this tale, and don't forget to subscribe for more captivating stories. Thank you for watching.